Hello, Brave Nation. We just got finished with a consequential primary here in Alaska. So I wanted to take a little bit of time on the podcast here to talk to you about voting and the strategies around ranked choice voting in particular, as well as how we steward our civic responsibility of voting when we're not always excited about it. We'll talk about the concept of idealism versus pragmatism. Some of us lean toward one or the other, and how that plays out in public life. And we'll discover what a lot of Christians get wrong about voting. So, some of you might realize I had a little bit of disappointment with the primary results in Alaska. My favorite candidate that I had on the podcast a few weeks ago, Shelley Hughes, did not win the primary. And when I first decided to support her, I honestly didn't know if she could win. It was very early on, but I knew that she had the skills to lead well. And I also knew that she lined up with a lot of my values, not only in the what needed to happen, but also the how. And I liked the way that she conducted herself in the public sphere. And so I know a lot of these candidates that ran for governor personally, and I honestly have pretty good relationships with them. But nevertheless, I supported Shelley because she rose above in what I felt like I wanted out of a candidate. So, a lot of people call the form of government that we have here in the US a democracy. But some of you know it's a little more nuanced than that, right? All forms of government have their strengths and weaknesses. So let's take a look at the extremes. Let's look at a monarchy, for example. Now, of course, none of us really want a monarchy, but the strength of a monarchy is that people can learn to coalesce in unity around one leader. And they have to do this pretty much or else, right? So the obvious drawback is that absolute power tends to lead, because we have fallible human beings, tends to lead to absolute corruption. So if your ruler is not benevolent, if they are, it's great. But if they're not, you're kind of out of luck. And that's what the framers of our Constitution realized, right? Then you have the other extreme of more of a pure democracy. And let me tell you, we tout democracy all the time, but you do not want a pure democracy. It's not a good thing either. And a pure democracy is where everyone votes on everything and everyone has an equal say. Just think about even if that happened in your family. The problem with this is, I'll just say it bluntly, that the majority of people are not smart enough or informed enough to really lead well, and they would make really poor decisions if we were driven around by what the mob wanted all the time. I'm reminded of how the crowd acted around Jesus. One week they wanted to make him king. They were singing his praises in the streets, bowing down, putting palm branches down. The next week they wanted to kill him. So the crowd and the mob, they're very fickle and they're very volatile. So what the framers of our Constitution knew is that we wanted common people to participate in the government with their votes, but they didn't want the fickleness of this mob kind of rule, because the collective crowd is overall pretty self-destructive. Now, it used to be that only landowners could vote. So by the framers' reasoning, these landowners were the ones who really had to bear the brunt of the cost of the decisions that were made on their land. They were also likely to be more educated. Now, women and enslaved people groups, obviously, at that time did not get the vote until later on. Now we do. But as we have opened up voting to more and more people, and as our country has grown in numbers, the political landscape has changed pretty dramatically. And now we have more money than ever being poured into our elections, not only local money, but we have money from all around the world, and and big money, right? And what used to be newspaper articles where you'd share information and candidates standing on street corners or going to neighborhoods, now it's big television ads, and we use polling to tell us ahead of time who is going to win. And these polls, whether or not they're scientific, which most of the time they're not, they influence the vote heavily, because everyone wants to vote for a winner, not someone who's trailing in a poll. So even if the poll is bogus, it becomes true, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then we throw in ranked choice voting into the mix, as we have here in Alaska. And then we have all new kinds of problems and strategies to consider. The people who actually participate and vote in this, what we call a jungle primary, they actually don't rank in this primary. This is the primary where there are no party divisions and anyone at all can get themselves on the ballot. Anyone. The people who vote in these elections are the ones who get to decide very much about how the election will turn out in the end. Because unlike some of the initial polling that maybe was not scientific, the jungle primary is a poll of real people voting, but it's just a tiny fraction of the people who will vote in the general election. So in Alaska, a lot of the political influencers actually know each other. It's because our state is so small by population, even though it's really big by geography. And so it didn't take long for my husband and I, when he first ran for office, to get to know everyone, a lot of the main influential people in politics here. And I might not be as insider as some might be considered, but just having real relationships with the candidates as a whole is a different thing than seeing them on a TV ad or just hearing their political speeches. So it's really advantageous if you're running for office and you can get lots of these influential political voices to support you, the ones that are kind of informed on things. But even if you don't get that, what you can do by contrast is you can raise more money and you can spend more on ads. And so whether or not you have really good ideas, you can inundate the masses who have very little other information to go off of other than what they see in an ad. And as I was reading some books around this topic of, how people are influenced, I found that there are people who are very well informed about things, and they're not swayed by these political ads. They know, they can see through them. They can assess them based on their quality of information that's being presented. They call out BS. They know if a candidate's a liar because they have the background information to back it up. But when you don't have that background information, these people are swayed by the sheer number of times that they see a candidate on TV or that an issue is mentioned. They're swayed by the sheer number, not by the actual quality of the argument. And that's kind of scary, right? We can shift things when people don't have enough information very, very easily using money. Now, in Alaska, we also have the problem of being such a big state that it's difficult to really meet people who live outside the most populated areas like Anchorage or Fairbanks. So it happens that the sophistication of our elected officials tends to mirror the sophistication of our population, right? And what I've seen happening in our jungle primary is tons of money is being spent to compete with candidates of the same party. We had 17 candidates for governor alone. And what ranked choice voting does, and you'll see this, people who are fighting ranked choice voting, the people who are fighting it in these different states are the ones who have the most to lose. It's the most powerful parties that have the most to lose. Usually the other party wants to break up that power, so they're the ones who are for ranked choice. So what happens is you begin lining up your preferred candidates, and you have and all these different people of the same party. In our case, the Republican Party had way more candidates. So all these people got lined up with their preferred candidate. And then you have tons and tons of people disappointed because this is the candidate that they've invested so much into, and this candidate didn't win. So then we are expected to rally around someone else who might have been campaigned against just a few weeks before, right? So the thing is that winning in a jungle primary where there are 17 others is very, very different from winning in a general election where a lot more people vote and where there's not 17 other people. And so it's not just any general election either. It's an election where you're supposed to rank all candidates. So even if you're on the top in the primary, doesn't mean you can win in a ranked choice voting situation. This is so confusing. But who can win in a ranked choice situation is a very complicated and difficult to prove kind of thing. So we have 4 candidates who advance to the general election rather than the traditional 2 like you would have in a regular election. And so strategically, the only way you can really ensure that your preferred party wins is if all the members of that party rally around one candidate. The second choice candidate can drop out theoretically, but that would be too straightforward for us if that was the only answer. No, in a field of 17 candidates, the next one would automatically take their place. So this means you would have to trust every next person to drop out. And how likely is that going to be to happen? So my opinion for the moment right now, an idea that I have, I don't know if this will stay my opinion forever, but I think the best option for the second place candidate of that party would be to stay in the race, but to simply endorse the other candidate and tell everyone to vote for that candidate number 1, and they could still rank that person number 2. Okay, so that's a thought. That's an idea. Now, some of you might have heard of, I know this got national news in the case of our decoy Dan situation that we have going on. Amazingly, this person no one previously knew before happens to share a name with our current Senator Dan Sullivan, and he was able to actually get into the top 4. I did not think this would happen at all by merely drafting off his name recognition, because he was a different Dan Sullivan. And so this is the crazy stuff that you get when you have a complicated system like ranked choice voting. You get really complicated results. So in a perfect world, every voter would be fully informed. But instead, people don't know which Dan to vote for. In a perfect world, the best leaders rise to the top regardless of how much money they have in their campaign, because voters understand who they are. But that's not the world we live in. I've read a lot of Thomas Sowell, and he says, and he constantly reminds me, life is a series of trade-offs. We cannot be 100% idealistic about things. And, you know, if you're a Christian, many Christians are very strongly oriented around our beliefs. This is not a bad thing, all right? But if you've taken the Clifton Strengths Finder, which is something that I really love, they give you a list of 34 strengths. And they usually, if you pay a small amount, they can give you your top 5 of those. And belief is one of them. And a belief is a really common one of people's top 5. Belief makes you act in accordance with what you feel really good about, what you want to align with, and that you share the most conviction with. But there's another strength called strategic. And strategic actually landed in one of my top 5. And it makes you lean more toward doing the thing that makes the most strategic and practical sense at the time. So you see how these two things can kind of be the yin and yang. They can be a little bit opposite, right? Some of us are more idealistic, belief-oriented people, and others are more pragmatic and strategic. And as Christians, I think we tend to be more on the idealistic side. And that's why so many of us stay away from politics or don't take the time to be informed and vote. Because if the situation isn't perfect, and if you don't believe in someone 100%, you might just say, I probably just won't vote. In fact, sometimes if you vote for someone who you find doesn't have the greatest character later, you feel almost like resentful or guilty about your vote, as if you are identifying yourself with that same lack of character, as if you made a mistake. And I think it's really a big mistake to think this way. It's that kind of white glove syndrome. Like if you get anything on you, that's a bad thing because you participated, but now you're disappointed in your candidate, right? If we think this way, this kind of perfectionistic thinking, this is the way we give away our voice and we give away our power. Now, very few people in the Bible actually had the power to vote, so we don't see it played out a lot in Scripture. It just wasn't as much of a thing back in those days. But our government does depend on us to handle the measure of power that we've been given with the mind of a responsible steward of the vote that we've been given. So think about a steward, what a steward might be. Imagine you are the steward or you're in charge of a large piece of land and you don't have time to do everything yourself. You don't even know how to do everything yourself. So you need to hire different people to work for you, to work your land and to be in charge of people there. So your choices of people are not unlimited. Let's say this is a very small town and you have to make a decision among a certain number of people. You need people to help, otherwise you're going to lose your land. So let's say you had a favorite candidate and you had really high hopes for this person, but then they had another opportunity come up and they had to leave town. So that left you with some of the other candidates that maybe you didn't prefer. You know that these candidates are risky, but unless you feel like you're able to step up and do it yourself, these are your choices. The only other choice is losing the land that you've been given to steward. You can make the best possible choice, or you can simply allow others to make the choice for you. That's another choice. Now, if you choose to participate, you'll at least get some of the things you wanted in a candidate. You might not get your most ideal choice, but you won't get the worst possible choice. And for most of us who really want to believe strongly in everything we do and do it with conviction, this feels wrong to make a choice between the greater of the less ideal choices in your mind. But the alternative of losing everything is far, far worse. Or the alternative of letting someone else do the hiring that shares none of your values at all, in fact, has the opposite values, is also not a really good alternative. So your vote may not seem to mean much, not like, stewarding your land where feel like you have that direct control, but this is your birthright. This is your inheritance as an American. And like Esau in the Bible, some of us begin to despise our birthright when we're not thrilled about the choices that we have to make. And we choose that easier bowl of stew instead. We like to sit on our couch and complain without really participating. I had someone recently approach me with a brave conversation, which I really appreciated him moving into that conversation. But he was making the case that there were 0 candidates up for election, and he was talking about particularly the governor election, that were worth anything. That basically they were all corrupt. And I was thinking, okay, so what choice are you leaving me with? If this is my field, my state, I have to hire someone, so to speak, unless I want to go out and run for government myself, which I don't think would work out very well. And I don't want to leave that choice up to people who have the opposite values that I have. So it's incumbent upon me to engage anyway. I must choose someone. Really, it's my duty to steward my vote in my land. And it may seem like such a small thing, but it's a very big thing. Particularly if you voted in this primary, good job, because you stewarded your power well. The fewer people that vote, the more your power actually is. And so I told him this. I said, if you have something that you're upset about in this nation, it's up to you to galvanize support around the thing you care about. Because in our nation that's fueled by the Democratic vote, galvanizing a group of people is a sort of capital, right? Especially when you don't have money to go galvanize those people, you have to do it yourself. And as we've seen, you don't need necessarily a lot of money to do this. In fact, we found that one candidate who raised the most money, he didn't even place in the primary, and he raised the absolute most money. So you need to connect with people, inspire them to action, to steward, so then they can steward their vote in the same direction as you. That's what I'm trying to do right now with you. Inspire you to action so that you will steward your vote as I've done. And this very frustrated voter can't really do anything if he can't do that. You have no power in this country to affect much of any change if you're not willing to go out and galvanize that support. So if you feel bullied in politics, which you will, if you engage at all, you will have mixed feelings. But then if you take your toys and go home, Guess who wins? The bullies. That's exactly what they want you to do. If you don't like ranked choice voting, so then you boycott it and you don't vote because ranked choice voting is in place, the ones who institute it have won. They've won the power over you. Let's say you don't like how the public schools are performing, so you never attend a school board meeting. Other people will take control in your absence. The responsible use of your voice is the one thing you have that can increase the power of your vote exponentially. So voting is one thing, then using your voice is the next level. And it's why I write articles when sometimes I'd rather not. Sometimes I'd rather not risk putting my voice out there, even over this podcast and over social media. It costs me emotional capital. And sometimes it even costs me something politically to stand on one issue or another. But what I lose if I don't use my voice to engage is far, far greater. I lose the whole land. Now, when I talked with Shelley on my last podcast, I spoke to her of the fact that not only did I like what she stood for, I liked how she conducted herself in the public sphere. I like how she made the decisions. So now when she's off the table, I look at the trade-offs. Maybe I have to look at someone who agrees with the what of what I believe, but maybe not the how I believe they should accomplish it, because it's all about the trade-offs. And you know what? Sometimes people in politics surprise you in a negative way. We always remember those things, right? But sometimes they surprise you in a positive way. Think about those of us Alaskans. We all had many of us anyway, had high hopes that Dunleavy might restore the PFD because that's what he ran on. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. We may not have 100% liked how he handled COVID-19 as an example. But I always think about how much worse someone else could have handled it during that time, because it's about the trade-offs. I don't have a crystal ball, and I doubt you do either. For all I know, there could be candidates that surprise me in maybe positively. So some of you may remember when I ran against Karen Bronga for the Assembly of the City of Anchorage. Karen and I didn't agree on very much politically, but she would always have a conversation with me one-on-one. She didn't always want to come on my podcast, but she would have a conversation with me, and I really appreciated that. And I was really surprised when she got in by the ways that she really cared about our city, and she tried to work to the best of her ability for the betterment of our city that we shared. Now, sadly, I have to let you know that Karen passed away in a tragic car accident this past month. And I wanted to take just a minute to honor the fact that she was willing at times to have a brave conversation, and she did what she thought was right for the people of Anchorage. And I really appreciated that. She was willing to stand even against some of the injustice that even still is plaguing us today. So we have to engage with these people and decisions according to the best of what we know. And we have to find as much common ground as possible with those who agree on what, but not necessarily always the how. If we can't come together around some common ground and put our past baggage behind us, which, believe me, there is a lot of baggage among these groups, especially the ones I know on the Republican side, we will find ourselves with the outcomes that we don't want. I mentioned before about how barely anyone in the Bible was able to vote. Well, that means that they were well acquainted with what it was like to be under a leader that had bad leadership, or who were just incompetent, or who were outright corrupt, right? Just think of the horrific things that leaders in those days did. They threw people into fiery furnaces. They signed edicts of mass genocide. They ordered the killing of all male babies and more. But you notice how God barely ever instructs his people, go destroy someone politically. Instead, he instructs them to do whatever it takes to make things right in their land. And it looked differently every time. For Esther, it was risking her life to correct a king who was stupid enough to accidentally sign the edict that would destroy her whole people in that land. She didn't make this guy an enemy. Instead, she solved the problem with grace and strategy. And so, whatever challenges you are facing in your town, your state, or your corner of the world, please steward your voice and your vote well. Don't blame yourself for not being perfect in your voting engagement. The only reason you should blame yourself is if you do nothing, if you disengage, and you can blame yourself if you refuse to unite with others to make a positive change. I hope this helps you as we go into this crazy, ramped up election season these next couple months. Always be brave, stay engaged.